There's lots of considerations when it comes to choosing the right camp spot for the night on our sea kayaking expeditions. This could be down to local permissions. Maybe the area or the part of the world that you're paddling in, you can't just simply throw up a tent wherever you want. It might also be down to just finding the right spot that's going to be sheltered from the wind, it's going to give us some nice flat ground, and it's going to mean that we can get off in the morning and we're not going to get weatherbound and stuck. So there's some obvious considerations when it comes to picking the right camp spot. First and foremost is trying to get some shelter from the prevailing winds or the prevailing conditions if there are any. It's not going to be a very pleasant night for everyone if we're camped on a super exposed headland where the wind's due to pick up and our tents are going to get buffeted by the wind and the conditions. So when I'm planning my camping, if it's windy or we've got any windy conditions in the forecast for that evening, I'm going to think about the exposure that I've got.
Faced with some strong building winds coming from the south-southwest that were due to pick up throughout the evening, we were keen to find a camp spot that offered some shelter. Looking at the topographical Ordnance Survey 1 to 50,000 map led us towards this area here, where we could see there was a nice flat area of ground with some woodland and some high ground at the back of it, offering shelter from those building southerly winds.
I'm also going to think about what the conditions are going to look like when I wake up in the morning. As a guy, there's nothing more stressful than sitting in my tent at night, hearing the wind picking up, hearing the sea picking up, and thinking, how on earth am I going to get off this beach in the morning with this deteriorating weather?
So last night when we picked our camp, we gave some thought into exactly where we're going to camp for the night, particularly around this deteriorating forecast that we've got. Not only was it due to get a lot wetter, but the wind built through the night. We knew that because we looked at the long-range forecast, and it was forecasting for strengthening winds from the west. So when we picked our campsite, we were really mindful that wherever we chose to camp last night, that we could get off in the morning. So we chose to camp on the easterly side of this island here. Not only did that give us protection from the winds last night, it also means that this morning we're paddling into some fairly protected waters. We can quite easily run back round the corner here. We're going to continue our journey, but we're not in a committed position where we're going to get stuck and trapped. Last night the temptation was to sneak round to the other side of this island where there's some amazing, really beautiful campsites. And we discussed it last night, the pros and cons of doing that. And I think had we have chosen to go round to this side of the island to camp, we'd have probably woken up this morning to find a bigger sea state breaking on the beach and some pretty critical decisions to make as to whether getting on the water is such a good idea. Don't forget, we're paddling boats full of kit, so they're not going to handle like a standard day boat. So it's going to be a lot harder to paddle in choppier conditions. So we're really thinking about picking a camp where we know we can safely depart in the morning and continue our journey.
Despite the best planning and our best intentions, it might be that we find out we're stuck at camp on a multi-day sea kite trip. Perhaps this is due to deteriorating weather out on the sea and the conditions just simply aren't suitable to paddle in. We might just need to wait it out until we get a break in the weather. In the meantime, we can have a cup of tea, make some food, and chill out and enjoy camp.
We want to get shelter from wind, particularly if it's very windy. However, sometimes, and particularly up in Scotland, for those that know it, if we camp in areas that have absolutely no breeze and are perhaps close to stagnant water, that is prime territory for midges. I know midges are quite unique to the UK, but all over the world we'll have mosquitoes and other bugs and insects that love little to no wind and damp, stagnant water and areas. This can make our campsite grim. Some of the worst nights camping I've actually had have been on beautiful, clear, sunny evenings where there's been no wind and all the bugs come out of the grass. all that happens is we end up wrapped up in midge nets, or worst case scenario, I've even found myself just shut down in my tent because there's so many bugs. If this is the case, think about camping away from stagnant water and trying to find a little bit of high ground so that we're picking up a bit of a breeze is going to keep those insects away. The other thing that's going to impact the decisions on where we camp is the size of the group. Simply having enough flat ground to put up our tents. It might also be that we need to think about accessing fresh water so that we can cook and get something to drink. We've got a host of different sources of information when it comes to trying to pick a suitable campsite. The easiest one is knowing an area, or perhaps chatting with some local paddlers and getting some local recommendations. A chart or a map is the next source. In the UK here we have OS maps or topographical maps. Topographical maps are great because they're going to give me a lot of information about what's happening on the land. Charts and Admiralty charts are good and they are useful, but they tend to have more information about what's happening on the sea and aren't always as good when it comes to picking camp spots on the land.
Having access to appropriate resources in terms of the right maps, charts and the right scale of these is really going to help when it comes to picking a suitable camp spot. A topographical map like this Ordnance Survey 1 to 50,000 scale is going to be a great starting point for picking a suitable camp spot. With this map we can clearly see that in this northwest area of the island there's a rocky foreshore with steep ground straight at the back of it. We can see from the contour lines what the land is likely to look like, and this is going to indicate that this area perhaps isn't ideal for camping. Over to the east here, there's some flatter patches of ground and the contours aren't quite as steep. There's also some smaller beaches that are marked on the map, and this may indicate some suitable areas to camp. We can also clearly see some little burns or streams that may give us access to some fresh water. Looking at the 1 to 25,000 scale gives us even more detail. These campsites, like these ones to the east here, really stand out on this 1 to 25, and it becomes really clear to see that this westerly area looks less than promising. We've got to remember though that a 1 to 25,000 is a really big scale to have on the deck of our boat and isn't always practical. And here's a shot of a chart for the same area. As you can see, this is a 1 to 50,000 scale chart, and it's really hard for us to clearly see any suitable camp spots. Very little information on the shape of the land, where there may be fresh water, or whether there's going to be a suitable camp spot. If we have a phone signal, we can access Google Earth, and this can be a really good tool to help us build up a picture of what the land looks like. With Google Earth, we can zoom into an area and get an idea of what the lay of the land is like. So for example, we can zoom into this area here and we can start to see that there's a bit of a beach with some flat ground at the back.
So we've come to our camp spot for the night, and we've chosen this location for a variety of reasons. One is we've got a lovely shelter from the westerly winds we've got this evening. It's not much of a carry. We've got running water near us here and a nice flat, or a couple of nice flat areas of grass to pitch the tents on. So a really excellent spot for the night.
At the end of a long day on the water, one of the last things we want is an enormous long carry up the beach with our boats. If we arrive at a camp spot at low tide and the high water mark is miles up the beach, it's going to be really exhausting getting our boats up there. Gradually sloping beaches with a really big tidal range, and if we were to arrive at low water, can result in a big carry. For example, we may have planned to camp in the sand dunes here on the Outer Hebrides, but arriving at this beach at low water, we're going to have to carry the boats 300 or 400 metres up the beach. It's going to be far more beneficial to arrange our arrival around high water or look for a more accessible campsite. Don't forget, we need to consider what the tide is doing in the morning as well, so that we don't have a big carry to get back on the water.
As always, we're going to think about minimising our impact on the environment. Thinking about disturbance to others, so if we're near to somebody's house or somebody's small holding, we're possibly going to look for another camp spot. But as previously mentioned, this will often depend on local bylaws for the area or the part of the world that you're paddling in.